Hi, I'm Dan Fletcher, CFO of Planful, the leading planning and reporting platform. You are listening to CFO Thought Leader.
This is episode 1083.
Someone asked me about being all remote and how you can be all remote and be successful. And it was at a conference I was at up in Napa Valley. It was with a bunch of public company, private company CFOs. And the one thing that really came to mind in hearing people talk about all remote, hybrid, or return to office was that people were spending a lot of time debating the policy, and nobody was spending a lot of time being deliberate about what all remote means and given the tools and resources on how to be successful all remote. And so at GitLab, we don't believe hybrid can be successful. We run meetings in a very prescribed way where the materials are published 24 hours in advance. There's an agenda. You actually review the materials and put stuff in the agenda. When the meeting starts, you actually go to question number 1, question number 2, question number 3. And so it's a very deliberate to run it that way.
It was a moment CFO Brian Robbins tells us he'll never forget. Stepping onto a makeshift stage to address some 400 employees just minutes before an 8K filing would publicly announce the potential sale of a major business unit. The room bristled with anxiety. People worried about their jobs and the future of the company. In order to convey openness, Robbins declined scripted talking points, instead choosing to speak from the heart as he vowed to keep everyone informed as the events unfolded. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. Our talk with CFO Brian Robbins begins after this.
When it comes to company spend, most finance teams are on defense, reacting to surprise spend, chasing receipts, saying no. But there's a better way. Meet Brex, the AI-powered spend platform that boosts a company's control, earnings, and speed. 99% of customer spend is compliant. 11 million hours saved on expenses and accounting through automation. $681 million plus back to customers in business building rewards. Make every dollar count with Brex.
Hello, we're speaking with Brian Robbins, CFO of GitLab. Brian, welcome.
Jack, thanks for having me on today.
So, Brian, as we always do, we'd love to have you look back over your career for us and identify what you think some of those experiences or roles that you feel shaped your leadership perspective in finance. What comes to mind?
It's a great question, Jack. When I think back on my career, I go back to things that were forming moments in my career. And one of the forming moments when I was 12 years old, my dad gave me a lawnmower and said, you can cut as much grass as you want to. And when you turn 16, I'll match however much money you have saved up for a car. And so really at age 12, I learned some of the basic principles of finance, revenue assurance, marketing, bad debt collection and so forth. And it was really, those things actually play a big role in what you do today. And so, part of my job today is really working with our CRO and our go-to-market team and making sure, that we have good go-to-market execution. Obviously, we have to close the books, every quarter. So you do the reconciliations and then you speak with investors. And so there's a lot of what I'll call the basic principles I learned at a very early age that still take effect today in the finance role.
So, if you wouldn't mind, just for those listeners who are just starting out their careers in their 20s, perhaps, who were you back then? Did you know it was going to be finance right away, or did it take a little while to find your footing?
When I looked at my college major, I tried to go through all the various disciplines. And the one that, really, I read, that I came to like the most was really finance, because in finance, you had the ability to do operations. You had the ability to work with marketing. You had the ability to understand the technology of the business, everything that went into making the business drivers and so forth. And so I was really intrigued with, all the aspects that went into finance. that you could play within a company, especially in the financial planning and analysis role. That was really a role that you had the ability to, work on M&A, work on budgeting, work on, actuals to budget comparison and so forth. And so it enabled me to get, really a broad overview of the business at an early age and be able to work on a lot of different things.
I noticed that you also had a stint in treasury fairly early on in your career. And again, what we see is it's not accounting, it's financial planning and analysis and treasury that shaped your very early chapter. How am I doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's two different ways I've seen CFOs come up, through time. And it really depends on things that are going on, within the overall markets and regulatory and so forth. And so when Enron and WorldCom were having their issues and Sarbanes-Oxley came on, a lot of people were really focused towards heavy technical accounting. But then if you roll the clock forward to say 2008, where there's the debt crisis, the global debt crisis going on, a lot of people wanted really operational CFOs that could understand the core business drivers within a company to actually help the performance of the company. And so, I came up through the FP&A treasury ranks, as you stated, which really gave me the opportunity to see all aspects of the business, how the business operated, and how to drive increase shareholder value through the FP&A function.
So you did something that's pretty remarkable. I mean, you make it to your first CFO appointment within 10 years or roughly 10 years of your professional career. You can correct me if I'm wrong there.
When I mentor people, there's a couple of things that I talk about within my career that I think are really useful. One is really building relationships. I think it's really important for folks to actually have a mentor that they can go to and talk about within their career. Build relationships within the business itself as well. And so, in finance, you're helping people drive value throughout the business, and you're doing that through data that's factual, that can help drive critical business decisions to drive value over time. The third thing is just being available, taking on different projects and be able to understand more of the business and the drivers. And so there's a number of different things I think have really helped me with my career. But really it started off with the EQ side, and understanding people and building relationships.
Yeah. And I think you hit the ground running with that. I'm making an assumption here. You shared an anecdote about your father. It seems to me that you had an understanding of the corporate environment.
Yeah, it was watching my dad grow up and do his business. He was a salesperson. He traveled mostly Monday through Thursday for, most of my life. And, being able to talk to him about his career and what he did was extremely helpful for learning about the corporate world and some of the expectations that were out there.
Now, I mentioned, again, you've had 5 CFO career chapters, the latest one being at GitLab. What I thought was interesting as I looked down the bio, you did have a stint at Computer Sciences Corp, which kind of sticks out because it's just a super large enterprise, a little different from some of the other companies you become associated with. But it's sort of sandwiched between 2 of your CFO chapters. And I'm wondering, did that experience help you realize a preference, and I could be wrong here, for smaller, more nimble organizations, or were there other factors driving that decision?
Yeah, interesting you bring that up. It seems like it was years ago. I get brought into companies, help prepare them to get ready to go public. One company that I was already public while I was there was VeriSign, now CFO of. But most of the other companies I've actually helped take in public, like GitLab. During one of those stints, a recruiter called me up and said, there's someone running a division that you would really like. Would you like to meet that individual and become a divisional CFO? And I've traveled most of my career out to the West Coast to work for companies, but living on the East Coast. And CSC just happened to be right down the road in Northern Virginia. And I met the individual who was the divisional CEO, really hit it off, and thought it would be great working with that individual. And so that's why I accepted the role at CSC.
And did you, when you leave, you step into another CFO role of what I think would be a smaller company? No lessons, no preference then from bigger to smaller?
Yeah, most of my career I've gone into pre-public companies. I like to, there's four criteria that I look at from a company perspective. When I look at joining company, one, I want to go to the company with tailwinds, not headwinds or crosswinds. And so I want to go into a market that I believe, that has a lot of growth behind it, and the market overall is growing and the company is doing well. Two is, I really spend a lot of time with the CEO. As a CFO, you are a counterpart to the CEO, and you want to make sure that you can be a good business partner and that you can, go out with individual and get dinner at any time. On the weekends, if you want to go hiking or do something with individual, if you're on a business trip, you'd have a fun time doing that. And so spend a lot of time with the CEO is important. Three is, go into a company that has a really good board. I've been at businesses before that didn't have a good board, and boards can really add a lot of value to the company from a strategic standpoint, a guidance standpoint, and really leveraging their years of work experience. And then last is always going to a company that's at least 100 million AR. That number now may be switching because companies are going public a lot later. But to me, it was really important because I'm really good at market execution and not so good at product adoption. So 0 to 10, 0 to 25, 0 to 50 million. I feel like you're really still in product adoption. When you reach 100 million or greater in ARR, growing over 50%, you're really into market expansion and market execution. And that's where my strengths really lie.
Now, over your 5 appointments, several of the companies you led were acquired. Were you involved with some of the M&A deals there? And what, if any, lessons did you take away from guiding those organizations?
Yeah, is most of the time when you look to go public, you run a dual track process, either directly or indirectly. Word always gets out when you follow your S1, even if you do it confidentially, word does get out. And so a lot of times there is a dual track process. On the deals that we've done, the companies I've been at, I led those transactions. And, I guess at the end of the day, the lesson learned is there's many ways to create shareholder value. In some case, it may be through M&A and, putting that company into a bigger company. In some cases, like GitLab, it's being a standalone company and going out to market, as a public company.
Certain finance leaders we speak to, it's clear, they've become sort of branded as an M&A CFO, or they're branded as this is an IPO CFO. Do you have a brand?
Yeah, I don't think there's a brand for an IPO or an M&A. I've really, in my career, I've partnered mostly with the CROs and go-to-market and really understand the go-to-market function. And so when I come into a company, I want to make sure that most of the finance resources, especially in FP&A, are pointed towards the go-to-market function and really helping out the CMO and the CRO. And so there's a number of people that I converse with, obviously, on a weekly basis within the company, but I mostly talk to the CR, CMO and go to market. So that could be, pricing, packaging, understanding variable compensation, territory splits, a number of different things. And so, I've been at companies before that had mediocre go-to-market execution, and I've been at companies that had great go-to-market execution. And I really think that's a true differentiator in creating shareholder value. And so my CFO journey has been really spending time with companies on that go-to-market function.
Can you tell us something, give us some perspective about go-to-market over the last 10 years, just given the amount of data that's now available and how finance leaders have become very sharp at how to measure these customer experiences and collaborate with the go-to-market teams. It's matured at a rapid clip, we get a sense. Can you share some perspective as far as what you've seen over the last 10 years? And what your tool belt is today versus, 10 years ago even?
Yeah, absolutely, Jack. You're spot on with that. It's, what works, 5 years ago doesn't necessarily work today. And, not only has the go-to-market challenges been different, but the technology in which they're selling has been different. And so, 10 years ago, mostly it was on-premise software, and you're going in, you're selling the software. Now you have the cloud. Now there's different ways to actually consume the software. And so at GitLab, we try to meet customers with where they're at And, even the pandemic, changed a lot of how you're selling. And so, I would say what you're selling has changed a lot. How you're selling has changed a lot. Pre-pandemic, it was a very technical sale. Post-pandemic, most everything's gone to the CFO for approval. And so it's technical with a heavy financial, emphasis. And you're trying to actually create that pitch where they can actually take part of that pitch and actually take it to the CFO for approval. And so you're talking a lot about, return on investment, payback periods. You want to make sure that you actually have the tools and resources with your product to basically enable the smooth implementation of the product. And then you want to make sure you have decent telemetry, especially for SaaS products, so you make sure that they're actually using the product once it gets deployed. And so customer centricity is more important today, I believe, than really any time, that I've been a CFO. And so, I think there's really, it's been an evolution over the last 10 years and will continue to change. And I guess the one main lesson learned for me on that is that, being a CFO in a software company, you have to be adaptive and flexible to change with where the market's going to continue to be able to see the returns on the product.
Nice overview for us there. Thank you for that. Just wanted to ask quickly, again, curious if, we want to find out about GitLab. So we're going to jump to our business segment very soon. But I'm curious about your career building, whether you mentioned board members. It seems like your relationship building skills, your network has grown over time. It's never been more robust, perhaps. At the same time, have recruiters played a role, or were you more dependent on your network as you receive CFO appointments going?
I would say almost all of my CFO appointments came from the network. Obviously there's a number of recruiters that reach out. CSC was the one where the recruiter reached out and said, "Hey, you'll know someone here. I think you'll really like them. Be a great opportunity. It's a potential CFO successor slot to the corporate role." But I would say the majority of them outside of that one has been through my network. And so, for instance, GitLab was a board member on the GitLab board that was a board member on another board that made the introduction to the company that led to getting the CFO role. Same thing with, all the other companies is through folks that I knew, and they called me up and said, "Hey, you may be interested in looking at this. Would you like to look at the opportunity?"
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Ryan, we'd like to find out about GitLab now. Tell us about this company. What's it about today?
Yeah, so let me explain to you what GitLab does. GitLab is the most comprehensive DevSecOps platform to enable people to make software. And so we enable people to make software better, faster, cheaper, more secure. So we have the entire software development lifecycle in a single pane of glass that basically allows people to increase cycle times by at least 7x. Forrester did a study on the company, and the payback period for our ultimate product, which is our highest priced product, is about 6 months. ROI is over 480% in 3 years. And so for the non-technical person, the way that I explain this is we are the single source of record for software development. Think about when you use an iPhone, everything's seamlessly integrated into the iPhone, whether it's music, booking airline tickets, booking hotel tickets, calling an Uber. You get to use all these applications within the Apple platform. We do the same for GitLab. So you get to do plan, manage, deploy, secure, all within the GitLab platform.
Now, I just want to point out your timing. Joining GitLab, you arrived the year before it goes public. And again, this is 4.5 years ago. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love just to, what was your experience leading GitLab's finance organization through the IPO process? I'm sorry, that's a big question, but whatever you care to share, having had that important chapter here. And was it your first IPO, or had you done others as a CFO?
Yeah, it was my first as a CFO. I've gotten a number of them very close, but they've been acquired. And then I was the number 2 at Newstar when we took Newstar public. And so had a lot of experience with IPOs and getting ready for an IPO. Was the first as a CFO, taking it through the entire process, all the way to being listed, on the exchange. And so, I was brought into, GitLab, to help the company get ready to go public. And, the team there had done a great job. They've already started IPO readiness, but really is a focus on, forecast accuracy, understanding, what the long-term plan could be, simplifying the investor message, writing S1, getting audits done. And, a lot of it's company dependent, but some of it's market dependent as well. And so it was sort of perfect alignment of when the company became ready and when the market was there. And so about 11 months after I arrived, we were able to successfully go public on the NASDAQ stock exchange.
Wow. Now, again, time means everything. And we can all look back to that period. That was COVID, the year of COVID. You arrive in the C-suite there. You take this company public within 12 months or what have you. And I'm just curious, GitLab is famously all remote today. And, can you reflect a little bit on some of the decision making there? How did you manage, mentor, and keep a pulse on a fully distributed finance team?
Yeah, it's a great question because I've never worked in an all remote environment before. I'm based on the East Coast. I've worked primarily for West Coast companies. So I've spent most of my time on planes, my entire career because they've been all West Coast companies. And, when GitLab came up as an opportunity, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to go work for a company where I wouldn't have to be on a plane every week. And the reality is when you went to those companies that required you to be in the office, you spent most of your time in a conference room talking to the same 7 or 10 people the entire week. And so you really didn't get an opportunity to see as many people as you would think you would, on an in-person environment when you're traveling in Monday through Thursday. And so GitLab really suited me being on the East Coast. My entire interview process was all remote. And so I went through the entire process and, the first time I actually met someone in person at the company, was when we were filming the IPO roadshow video. And so the production crew is going to come out on the East Coast. I didn't think that was, financially responsible and I hadn't met anybody. So 11 months into it, I actually flew out to the West Coast and met the team in person. Someone asked me about being all remote and how you can be all remote and be successful. And it was at a conference I was at up in Napa Valley. It was with a bunch of public company and private company CFOs. And the one thing that really came to mind in hearing people talk about all remote, hybrid, or return to office was that people were spending a lot of time debating the policy and nobody was spending a lot of time being deliberate about what all remote means and given the tools and resources on how to be successful all remote. And so at GitLab, we don't believe hybrid can be successful. We run meetings in a very prescribed way where the materials are published 24 hours in advance. There's an agenda. You actually review the materials and put stuff in the agenda. When the meeting starts, you actually go to question number 1, question number 2, question number 3. And so it's a very deliberate to run it that way. Your entire onboarding is done through our product, the GitLab product. And so you onboard yourself, you have an onboarding buddy, but it's very deliberate. And so, one of the reasons why I think GitLab is so successful, we're in over 65 countries and over 2,000 team members all over the world, is that we're very deliberate in how all remote works and what the expectations are.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, putting the information out there way in advance, allowing people to digest it so they're not doing it during the call, I suppose. But, virtual supposedly, and we've heard this from finance leaders who have struggled with their remote teams, because and particularly in the realm of FP&A, where we have finance executives who are trying to build relationships or partner within the business, as they like to say.
Right.
And they felt dislocated, as their office spaces went remote. They felt like they didn't have the contact they needed to be an effective FP&A professional. I think you'll share with us that it's the same dynamic. You have to develop the tools to partner differently, perhaps. I don't know. What would you tell us about that?
It is. We spend a lot of time in the interview making sure that we can hire people who will strive in an all remote environment. And so, before the interview even starts, from a resume that they actually have the competency set to be a really good FP&A person. And then you're actually spending a lot of time to actually culturally understand, if all remote works for them. GitLab is very different in the fact that, when we actually do our recruiting, we have a talent team that actually goes outbound to actually get the resumes and source them versus taking all the resumes inbound and only taking inbound resumes. So they'll do a mixture or two, but we actually go out and seek individuals that we think will be a good fit in an all remote environment. One of we have something called the credit values. The D stands for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And so we'll make sure that when we're hiring, for the right competency set, but we're actually hiring, diverse candidates, that can also add more than just a financial analysis, that they'll bring different backgrounds, different cultures, within the company.
I want to ask you something specific to this unique space that GitLab's in. How in open source and DevOps, just curious as to the developments in this market, the market movements, and how they've influenced your finance decision. Unique to open source and DevOps market movements, how have they influenced your finance decisions along the way?
I think for us, being all remote, we're mostly all of our products that we choose are typically in the cloud. And then we go through a evaluation of the products based on the sort of application stack that we have. And so within my organization, we have a lady that runs a VP of enterprise applications, and they've built out a future stack of what all the applications are that we need to run the finance organization, as well as all the sales and marketing tool set as well, and how all those integrate, from a SOX perspective, from an integration perspective, and so forth. And so you have to take a long-term view to that. Some of them are open source, some aren't, but really it's more from a technology standpoint and how they fit together and what makes sense, and what solutions they offer.
All of what you shared with us about go-to-market, how it's really become such an important strategic component of what you do. Can you share with us, did you organize finance a little differently to, sharpen that focus? Have you, and maybe it's a mindset more than an organizational change, but what would you tell us?
I would say a couple of things I've learned throughout my career that, I think has been really helpful. Earlier in my career, there was sort of a BU finance function, a business unit finance function, as well as a corporate finance function. And they were always sort of trying to come up with the same data and work together. I really thought that was highly repetitive. And so the way that I run my FP&A teams is it's sort of a mini CFO team that actually goes out and works directly for the CRO, directly for the CMO, directly for the CTO, directly for the Chief Information Security Officer. They sit in their staff meetings. They help them with budgeting. They build a dotted line relationship between myself and that individual. And then they have to build the trust bond with that person to actually help them with all aspects of what they do. And so there's not any repetition whatsoever. And so they're actually involved in all aspects. And their number one thing is they aren't there from a finance perspective. They're there for help and making sure that the company is doing the right things for the shareholders.
Did you, along the way, was there any deliberate changes that you made? Was there a new position that you created? Was there a new tool that was adopted? Maybe a piece of technology? I don't know. But anything to sharpen your FP&A team's insights?
Yeah, so I reorganized the team to sort of fit that mini CFO model. And so at a VP of go-to-market within FP&A, and a VP of, sort of the back office, G&A, R&D, into other aspects of the company. Then underneath them, they had little teams. And the important thing was to create a pod of excellence. And so you'd have an FP&A person, typically alongside a data person, typically alongside someone within those organizations that would work very closely on day-to-day tasks and build that relationship with one another. And I think building these pods of excellence really helps for the finance function, especially to understand the business, understand what some of the pain points are, and really helps them do better work because they have more of the context about the work that they're doing.
Brian, we want to quickly touch on AI with you. And again, we're kind of looking through two lenses, I suppose, but where do you see AI having the biggest impact on, one, GitLab's product roadmap, and two, your finance operation? What would you share with us on that?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. That's a great question. AI is on the minds of everyone today in business. So let's talk about AI in GitLab first. And so within GitLab, we actually have 3 products. We have Duo Pro, which is like code suggestions. And so when the developer's gone through and coding, it will actually make recommendations of what should be out there. There's a lot of companies out there that do code suggestion type solutions. We have Duo Enterprise, which basically injects AI throughout the entire software development lifecycle. So we put out a report on coding and developing, a survey report, and only about 25% of the time I actually spent coding. And so all those other tasks that you spend 75% of the time on, Duo Enterprise can help with because it actually helps you inject AI throughout the entire software development lifecycle. And then the last product that we have is called Duo Workflow. We just launched this in private beta a couple weeks ago. And this is agentic AI. And so we're creating agents to go do tasks that otherwise humans would do to actually help make the software development process even more efficient and better. And so we hope to continue to develop those agents to help out as well. And so there's 3 areas of how AI is being used within our product. From a company standpoint, we've been using Anthropic, and we have a license for everyone in the company, and so we have a Slack channel internally to actually look at how people are using AI and all the different use cases. And so we're starting to play with it right now to understand it. We aren't relying on it from a financial close perspective or, an audit perspective. Our auditors are using AI, to get more data and to understand. They aren't using reliance on it yet, but we're seeing ways that we can actually use it in our day-to-day business and actually help us become more efficient.
When it comes to AI investing, are there metrics or frameworks that are, helping guide your decision-making at this point?
That's a good question. There's a lot of work around AI in general, and there's a lot of different ways to approach AI. At GitLab, we use single engineering groups. And so we don't try to create this monolithic project that we work on for 12 or 18 months and just release. We actually do iteration on that project over time to get it better. And so then we can do more things and test more things out and get customer input as we go through that process.
Well, thank you for that. We are up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment. And Brian, as you know, every finance leader encounters a moment when they have to make a tough call or that could change the trajectory of a business. Can you take us back to a time when finance played a pivotal role in shaping strategy or the direction of the business?
Yeah, I mean, there's, as a finance leader, you get pulled into a lot of different directions. And maybe operations, maybe general management, maybe strategy, guidance on how you're going to do in the future and what you're delivering to investors, messaging of the company. As I think back through my career, there's a lot of different things that I could probably talk about during this segment. The one that really comes to mind is back when I was at VeriSign, we divested a lot of the non-core assets. And so going through that process of saying, what is a non-core asset? Over the course of 2000 to really 2005, the company acquired roughly about 60 companies. We actually put those companies into 12 product bundles and took them out to market in the 2007, 8, 9 timeframe. It was a really tough time frame because that was when, we had a big stock market downturn. There's a lot of debt crisis going on, globally within the world. But it was a really interesting process to work through to write confidential investment memorandums for those 12 bundles that we put together, trying to get management teams around them, having them present what they do. We had to do our audited carve-out financials for them. As we reported earnings, we had continuing operations and discontinued operations. But one thing that came to mind is when Symantec bought our SSL business, an 8K was going to drop that afternoon. And I had to get up in front of my entire staff, which was about 400 at the time, and basically tell them that an 8K was going to drop. The deal wasn't done. But if you communicate to me, I'll communicate to you. And it was a really lengthy process to go through that. But one thing that you're really concerned about is that all staff would go look for a new job. And I committed to giving them a certain amount of notice, that there'd be a lot of jobs within the new company, and so forth. And just through that active communication with one another, we had very, very few people opt out. And the people that did actually allowed you to know their intentions. So it was a smooth transition for everyone. And so when companies are going through that magnitude of change, through divesting a lot of businesses, in that particular instance, we actually sold the campus, the VeriSign campus. We sold all the SSL assets. It was really important to make sure that you could communicate and understand, so you can meet in the middle to actually achieve your overall goal. And we were successful at doing that.
So you stepping in front of the podium at that place and time, is that the exact moment when you knew you had to act? Did it occur to you how important that moment was?
It did, right? Because we had signed a deal. It was pending due diligence and a number of different things. So you weren't certain if the deal was going to go through, but you had enough certainty where you had to file an 8K to tell the markets. And between, call it, 1 p.m. California time, when the markets close at 4 p.m. on the East Coast, and, it was going to drop at 1:15 p.m. California time, you called an all hands meeting. You had to get on stage and tell the team. And we did this across the company. So everybody was doing it at the same time. And you didn't have really any data that you could share because it was still a big unknown, but you just sort of came to what came to your heart, right? And you wanted to be honest and transparent and tell people where things were at and what you would commit to the team. And I think that openness and transparency, and just active communication really played a big part in making that a successful transaction, and where everybody landed in a good place, versus everybody acting independently very quickly and, really hurting everybody in the process.
I want you to think back to that first CFO appointment. Again, I mentioned you got there fairly quickly. On average, that's a pretty good 10-year sprint to the CFO office. But when you arrived there, Brian, there must be something. If you could go back and tell yourself something right now, you get to go back and tell that newbie CFO, here's a piece of advice. What would it be?
It was finding the right mentors, getting involved in a lot of projects, keeping your head down, and just good, honest, hard work.
What size company was that? VeriSign, I guess.
VeriSign at the time, gosh, we had roughly probably about 5,000 or 6,000 employees. And we were several
domain company. This is the company that many of us first became familiar with, the nature of the domain business, I guess. Yeah,
VeriSign acquired Network Solutions. And so it was a combination of the SSL business. And so when you go into a website and you'd see that check mark, which was saying the website was certified to be true and legitimate and so forth, as well as the domain business. And so, we were basically the registry for .com and .net, and a number of other domain names now.
We always like to ask our guest, Brian, to reflect a little on the personal side, for us. Is there something, just looking at your colleagues, you've been there a while now, 4.5 years. They must know everything about you, but not this. What comes to mind? Is there something many people don't know about you?
We're a very transparent company. One of the things that we do at GitLab is called Ask Me Anythings. And so I'll host a 25-minute meeting several times a year where people can ask you any question that they want to ask you. And so we have a number of offsites and so forth. And so, I would say I know more about my team members, at this company than any other company I've been at, and vice versa. And so there's been a, transparency, I said, is one of the credit values, and people are very transparent with one another.
Do you think working remote encourages that type of transparency? I mean, people share more because they have a short amount of time, or, they have to build relationships in a different way.
That's a good point. I've never thought about it like that, but I can totally see where you're going with that. It's interesting when I'm on the phone with someone who reports to me and a kid's running into the room. They'll be like, "Hey, daddy or mommy's on the phone. I'll be in there in 10 minutes." I'm like, "No, go grab your daughter." And I like to meet them and then interact with the daughter. And, that's okay. We're all human. We have families. Families want to interact with what you do. And so, I think you do get an opportunity to, have a deeper personal work relationship with people in an all remote environment, because, you get to see some of their interactions around their house. Sometimes it's, they don't have the fake backdrop on and, they actually change rooms. You say, "Hey, are you on, did you go to a different location? Or are you somewhere different in your house?" There's just a lot of other discussion points that you necessarily wouldn't get within an office.
More patience. Is that a characteristic in the remote world, or what would you tell us?
Yeah, maybe it's the fact that, like, in a remote world, you have unlimited size of conference rooms, right? So sometimes you have a lot of people participate in meetings, you got meeting creep. And then because you don't commute, you have more time to work. But I think people, just understand, right? Technology doesn't always work. Things are going to happen. For me personally, flying out to the West Coast every week and, getting up to catch the 6 a.m. flight, which is really 3 a.m. on the West Coast. And, it's just, a lot less wear and tear on your body. And so you can, I guess you seem more relaxed. But it's, you're in a comfortable environment, and you realize that things aren't going to always be perfect. And so just having the flexibility and understanding, I think, is really important. I think that's probably what you're seeing.
Ron, would you have a book selection for us? Doesn't have to be a business book. Might be just something you escaped with, or a resource of some kind.
I just bought a book. I'm looking. It was recommended by one of my very dear friends. It's called The Power Law by Sebastian Malavai. I think it's about the venture capitalist world over the last 50 years and, has a lot of the VCs, in the book talking about, venture capital. He recommended it, said it was a great book, and I look forward to, digging into it.
Okay. Well, we're up to our final question. We're going to ask you to look forward finally. We're wondering what your priorities are as a CFO over the next 12 months. What would those be?
Let me start first with just sort of like the mission statement within the organization. I'll say, what I'm doing specifically within GitLab. But with everybody within the finance organization, I say it's really important to provide critical business data that's timely and factual to help drive, important business decisions, within the company. And so whatever we do and all the priorities are around making sure that we have correct data that can drive these important decisions to add shareholder value. For us, we just had an earnings call a couple weeks ago, and we really outlined 3 key principles that we're focused on as a company. And a lot of what I'm doing is in support of these 3 principles. One is continue to add first orders. First orders is new business. We typically, as a company, land relatively small. When we land with a customer, they stay with us for a long period of time. Our net dollar retention rate for customers 9 years ago, 10 years ago, are about the same as they are from 2 years ago. And so customers continue to expand with us because we put so much feature functionality in the platform. So continuing to land first orders, new business is really important. Giving value to our existing customers, increasing the value proposition for our customers, is also important. So this is really upgrading customers from premium to ultimate. Our ultimate product is our highest priced product. people upgrade to Ultimate, which makes roughly about 50% of our total ARR today, because of the advanced security features and compliance. And so that's really important. And then the third is R&D innovation. And R&D innovations all around AI that you talked about. Currently today in market, we have Duo Pro and Duo Enterprise. And then we look at getting Duo Workflow, which is our agentic AI, out to market here shortly.
Brian Robbins, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you so much, Jack.